There's a great verse in the Bible. It's found in the book of Job, chapter 35, verse 10. Job, after going through tremendous heartache and defeat, facing one trial and tragedy after another, Job says that in the midst of all that was wrong in life, God gives songs in the night. God is strong enough to keep us singing even when we go through the dark places in our lives, even when there is tragedy and pain and heartache. In those dark moments, God still gives us a song. I read the story about a Methodist preacher by the name of Luther Bridgers. Luther Bridgers began preaching at age 17. When he graduated from high school, he went on to Asbury College in Wilmore, Kentucky, and he became a wonderful evangelist in the Methodist Church. In the course of time, he met a lovely young woman by the name of Sarah. They fell in love, they got married, they had 3 wonderful boys. When it looked like everything was coming up roses for the Bridgers, when it seemed like the future was very bright, when everything seemed to look good, Luther accepted an invitation to preach at a conference. And while he was going to be away, he took his wife and 3 sons to her parents' home in Harrodsburg, Kentucky, just south of Lexington, and he wanted his family to stay with his in-laws while he was away. After 2 weeks of a great Bible conference where a lot of wonderful things happened, Luther Bridges couldn't wait to tell his wife Sarah about all that happened. But he never got the chance because he received word that tragically one night his in-laws' home caught on fire. And in the midst of that fire, his wife and 3 sons did not get out. They all died in the fire. That news, as you could imagine, rocked his world. He felt devastated. He felt totally overwhelmed. And during the very slow, long recovery from this overwhelming grief, Luther Bridgers remembered Job's statement, God gives songs in the night. And after several months of working through his grief, Luther Bridgers began to write again. And one day as he was writing, he wrote down the words to a song that we still sing today. Those words are, "There's within my heart a melody. Jesus whispers sweet and low. Fear not, I am with thee. Peace be still. In of all life's ebb and flow. Jesus, 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 the sweetest name I know. He fills my every longing and keeps me singing as I go." And when you read down further into that song, the 4th verse really reveals what Luther Bridges was going through. He wrote, "Though sometimes he leads through waters deep, and trials fall across the way, though sometimes the path seems rough and steep, see his footprints all the way. Jesus, 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 the sweetest name I know, for he fills my every longing, and he keeps me singing as I go." Luther Bridges discovered God gives songs in the night. And God led him through that time of tremendous sorrow and grief, and eventually Luther remarried. He went back to pastoring again, and he did a lot of mission and evangelistic work until the Lord took him home to heaven. Now, I tell you that story because all of us, at one time or another, feel pain. Pain comes to us in a variety of ways, but we know what the pain of tragedy feels like, and none of us like it. It might be the pain of an illness. It might be the feeling of being incapacitated. It might be the death of a loved one. And there are a whole lot of other things we could list that bring the pain of tragedy to the forefront of our lives. And whether we suffer with a broken body or a broken heart or a broken spirit, we know this thing called pain that moves in and envelopes us and affects us. I am thankful that the Word of God has something to say to us about when we go through those experiences. I'm thankful for stories like Luther Bridges' story that reminds us that we have one that we can turn to and encounter when we feel overwhelmed by the stresses of this life. And this one named Jesus is more than adequate to take care of us when we hurt. He's the one that we can turn to. Today in our ongoing series, Personal Encounters with Jesus, we go back to Mark chapter 5. Today we see a father who is experiencing a tragedy. On the day that he came to Jesus, there was sickness that was enveloping his little daughter's life, and she wasn't getting any better. She was getting worse, and eventually she died. And Jairus asked Jesus if he would come to his home and take care of his 12-year-old daughter. Jairus' heart was broken by the sickness that couldn't seem to get better. And Jairus decided that he would have a personal encounter with Jesus, and he would discover in that encounter that Jesus was more powerful than any sickness, that Jesus is more powerful than even death, that Jesus is the one who helps us in our times of pain and hurt. And so Jairus comes to Jesus. And when he has this encounter with Jesus, he discovers how powerful this one really is. This one named Jesus was able to bring victory over death, that last enemy that haunts all of us. And when we encounter Jesus, we see how powerful he truly is. And the same power that he gave in Jairus' home is the same power he offers in this sanctuary this morning. It's still available to us. Mark tells us that this man named Jairus was a leader in the church. He was a ruler in the synagogue, verse 22. That meant that Jairus was a man of prestige and privilege. He was a man who had power. He wielded power in his community. When Jairus spoke, people listened. When Jairus walked into a room, people stood up. He was a man who had it all, but suddenly one day came when having it all didn't really matter anymore. Because sickness and death could care less who a person is. Sickness and death cares very little about what a person has. Jairus was a religious person, but his religion was powerless to help him in the moment he needed it the most. On this particular day when we meet him, life is very focused for Jairus. His little girl was sick, and he couldn't do anything about it. His back was against the wall. He wanted to help her, but he didn't know what to do. He had everything that the world could offer him, but the real treasure of his life, his daughter, his only daughter, was sick and dying, and he couldn't do anything about it. Folks, sickness and death are no respecter of persons. They come into every person's life, into every family's life. When it comes, it hits in a powerful way. It hits the upper echelon of people, and it hits the lowest common man. You see, it doesn't matter who you are or what you've done in life. One day, tragedy will come knocking at your door. It's a fact of life. It is a reality that we all have to face. And when that day comes, you need to know where you can turn to. When heartache comes, you need to know who can help you to get through that particular moment. Jairus made a discovery through a personal encounter with Jesus that Jesus could help him. And I wonder, have you made that discovery? Have you come to the place that you've encountered Jesus and you know he can get you through whatever you're facing? You see, somewhere along the way, Jairus heard about Jesus. And even though he was a Jewish official in the synagogue, he came to the reality that Jesus was his only hope. He didn't know where else to turn. His little girl was sick. She was getting worse every day. And it just so happened this one that he had heard about has come ashore on a boat. And you might say, what a coincidence. No, that wasn't a coincidence. God had it planned that Jairus and Jesus' paths would intersect. It's interesting when you read this. Jairus, who was a man of great influence, came before Jesus, and he didn't come demanding, but he came reverently. Mark tells us Jairus fell at the feet of Jesus. That word fell, if you translate it out of the original language, means to descend from a higher place to a lower one. See, Jairus came before Jesus. A prestigious Jewish official humbled himself in the presence of Jesus. Why? He needed help. He needed someone to turn to. He came down from his place of prominence, and he was willing to ask Jesus for his help. My friend, if you have an encounter with Jesus Christ, you have to humble yourself. You've got to come before him, and you've got to come to the place where Jesus is everything. And when you put him in the position of being everything, you realize then how much you lack in your life. You realize that you don't have it all together like you thought you had it together. When you have an encounter with Jesus, you begin to see your weaknesses. You begin to see your inabilities. You begin to see you have fears that can overwhelm you. When you position yourself before Jesus, you can see you need help. But as you see you need help, you also see one who is powerful and able to give you that help. When Jairus came to Jesus, he fell down before him, and he makes his need known to Jesus. In essence, this is what Jairus said: I can't do this, but I believe you can. I can't deal with this, but I believe you can. My friends, that's a great statement of faith. I can't do it, but he can. When our back's against the wall, when we feel like there's nowhere to turn, how wonderful to know that we can come to the place in a personal encounter with Jesus, and we can say, Lord, I can't do this, but I know you can. And maybe today you've come to church and you've got some big problems in your life. Maybe you've got some heavy issues going on. Maybe you have burdens that you're trying to handle and bear on your own. You're trying to solve them. You're trying to find the answers for them. The problem is you come up empty. You're no further ahead than you were when you started looking for answers. Well, my friends, the Bible says we all need to have an encounter with Jesus. We all need to come to that place where we come before the Lord and we say, I can't do this myself, but I believe you can. Lord, I can't meet my needs, but I believe you can. You see, when you encounter Jesus Christ, you have to fall before him just like Jairus did, and you have to surrender yourself. You have to say, Lord, I need your help. I admit I can't make it on my own. I need your help. And the Bible shows us in this marvelous example that when you have an encounter with Jesus and you ask for his help, you then can watch his power go to work. You can see his hand begin to move. When Jairus tells Jesus his problem, isn't it beautiful to see that Jesus shows a caring heart? Jesus hears this plea from a father who is desperate, and Jesus agrees to go to his house. My friend, when you bring your need to Jesus, he'll have a caring heart towards you. When you have that personal encounter, you'll discover that He cares about you, and not only does He care about you, but He's on His way to meet your needs as well. The old tempter will come along and whisper in your ear, "Oh, Jesus doesn't care about you." Can I tell you that's a flat-out lie? Just as Jesus cared for Jairus and his sick little girl, He cares about you and your need today. Jesus began walking with Jairus. My friend, when you encounter Jesus, you might not get the answer right at that moment, but He'll walk with you, He'll stick with you, and He'll see you through. That's what makes Him so powerful. He has the ability to get us through. Isn't it interesting that Mark tells us they begin to move from the seashore toward Jairus' home, and there's a large group of people that's following along, and Jesus is stopped in His tracks by a woman who had the issue of blood and needed a healing. We talked about that last Sunday in our series. And I wonder, from a personal point of view, if maybe when this woman touched the hem of Jesus' garment and He stopped and had this interaction with her, if Jairus' heart might have been gripped by that delay. I just wonder if he wished Jesus would hurry up. It must have been confusing to him, to Jesus, to come and say, "I'll help you," and then He stops and kind of gets sidetracked. I mean, the woman who came to Him was an outcast. She was not a high member of society, and Jesus takes the time to care for her, and Jairus says, "My daughter is dying." But please remember, Jairus came to the place where he realized he couldn't solve his problem on his own, and he asked Jesus to handle his problem, and he left it at that. While the delay was going on, a servant from Jairus' home comes and delivers a message of very sad news. He says to Jairus, "Your daughter's dead. No use bothering the master anymore." Can you imagine how Jairus felt in that moment? How overwhelmed, how devastated. His world fell apart in that moment. You ever been there? Where some news came your way that just totally devastated you. That's where Jairus was here. And maybe Jairus thought, if only the crowd hadn't been so big, or if only that woman would not have stopped him along the way, my daughter would still be alive. When we get sad news, we get shaken to the core. Many people go to pieces. A lot of people will do the what ifs. Well, I prayed and I trusted and I hoped and I thought God was going to take care of this situation. Remember Mary and Martha? They had a brother named Lazarus who was sick and died, and they asked Jesus to come, and He didn't come when they wanted Him to come, and Lazarus ended up dying from his illness. And when Jesus finally got there, Mary and Martha were just a little bit upset that Jesus wasn't there. But Jesus came right on time because He raised Lazarus from the dead. When it seems to you that God is moving slow, keep the faith. Don't give up. What we see as a delay is God moving in His time and in His way to perform His perfect will. It's one of the great things we discover when we have an encounter with Jesus. This little girl in the story is no longer sick. She's now dead. And Jairus had put his faith in Jesus. But isn't it interesting? Even in the face of this news of a tragedy, Jairus' faith continues. Why? Because Jairus had an encounter with Jesus that showed him that when he put his faith in Christ, Christ could do something powerful. In fact, when the news came to Jairus, Jesus had something to say. They said, "Don't bother the teacher anymore. In verse 36, ignoring what they said, Jesus told Jairus, "Don't be afraid, just believe." Jairus, don't believe what you're hearing, what you're seeing, or what you think you know. Just keep trusting in me. And folks, there are many times in this life when we experience situations that we feel are hopeless, that they have no answers. But I want to tell you this morning, when you have a personal encounter with Jesus, you can bring each and every need you have in your life to Jesus. And the world may say to you, it's never going to work out, but by faith, keep trusting in the Lord. And when you put your trust in the Lord, He will powerfully work with you. And in His way and in His timing, He can do powerful things. It may not work out the way you think it ought to work out, but let me tell you this morning, it will work out. Encounter Jesus, and He'll take it from there. Jesus told Jairus, "Don't be afraid." And it's interesting, when Jesus got to Jairus' home, He saw people were there, and they were weeping and wailing. Now, there were some professional mourners in that day and age that went and just would do that because it was the thing to do. But I'm sure there were genuine people there that were experiencing the sorrow of that moment. And Jesus gets there and He says, "What is all this commotion about?" And then He says something amazing in verse 39. He says, "This child is not dead, but asleep." And you know what they did? They stopped wailing and they started laughing. They thought this guy was some kind of a crackpot. They couldn't believe that he would say something like that in a moment like that. But notice what happens next. Jesus puts everybody out of the room, out of the house, who didn't believe in Him. Can you hear him? Go on, get out of here. You don't believe? Get out of here. And Mark tells us the only ones that were there were Peter, James, and John, and the mother and the father. And Jesus takes them, and they go into the room where the little girl is. She's lying there, motionless. And Jesus walks over, and He takes her by the hand and says to her, "Rise." And all of a sudden, she did. Jesus' power caused death to flee out of that house. And she was alive. Immediately, she had all the signs of life. She was breathing, she was living, she was walking, she was talking. And all those who were there and witnessed the power of Jesus were astonished. Mark basically says, if we could put it in our modern day vernacular, Jesus blew their minds. That was one of the most powerful things they ever saw. And not only did He blow their minds, but then He says to them, "Don't tell anybody about it." You know, that's like getting the best news in the world and you can't tell anybody about it. But I love the way Mark ends this story. He warns them not to say anything about it, and then he says, "Get her something to eat." Doesn't that sound like a loving, caring person? She's alive, she's living. Get her favorite food to eat. You know, friend, Jesus invites you to bring your impossible situation to Him. He invites you to give whatever troubles you to Him by faith and trust Him to deal with it in His time and in His way. I want to tell you something this morning. Jesus can fix whatever's broken in your life today. Whatever's causing you fear, whatever person or relationship you're having a struggle with, Jesus can fix it. But one of the most important questions you have to ask yourself is, have I given my heart to Jesus? Have I had an encounter where I personally have invited Him to be my Lord and Savior? My friend, I don't know what your need is this morning, but I know the man who can meet your need. Today, you can have an powerful encounter with Jesus, and in His power, you can receive peace, comfort, help, hope, but you have to encounter Him. Now listen, Jesus is not a genie where you rub a bottle and he comes out and grants you 3 wishes. Jesus is the sovereign Lord of the universe. He can take impossible situations and turn them into miracles of his power and his glory. But he's waiting for us to trust in him. What's your need this morning? Give it to Jesus. Trust him to meet that need. Let me close with a story. Horatio Spafford was a man who gave his life trying to help people. And he especially came to the forefront when the Great Fire of 1871 ravaged the city of Chicago. Horatio Spafford was a lawyer. He suffered loss, personal loss in that fire, but he worked tirelessly to assist homeless and grief-stricken and down-and-out people of Chicago who lost all that they had in this great fire. He worked nonstop for 2 full years. And then he decided he needed to take a break, and so he and his family were going to join Dwight L. Moody in one of his evangelistic crusades in England, and then the Spaffords were going to go down to Europe for a little R&R. Well, Horatio Spafford was delayed in leaving when they originally scheduled to leave, and so Spafford took his wife and family down to the dock and boarded them on a ship and got them into their cabin and told them he would see them in a few days. In the early morning hours after that vessel set sail just off the coast of Newfoundland, the passenger ship that the Spaffords were on collided with another vessel, and it sank within 20 minutes. Spafford's wife, Anna, survived clinging to a piece of floating debris. She was only one of 47 survivors. But all 4 of Horatio Spafford's daughters died in the chilly waters of the Atlantic. When the survivors of that accident finally got to Wales, Anna Spafford sent a telegram back to Chicago, to where her husband was. And Spafford received the news with 2 words: saved alone. Well, Horatio Spafford made haste and got on the next available ship to go be with his grieving wife. And while sailing across the Atlantic, when the ship got to the place where the accident had occurred, the captain pulled Spafford aside and told him this was the vicinity where his daughters perished in the accident. And he stood there at the rail for a while, having some time of personal reflection. And then he went back to his cabin, and when he got into bed, he couldn't fall asleep. He kept tossing and turning. And he said he finally said to himself, "It is well, the will of God be done." Soon after that, Spafford joined his wife, and they went through the grieving process together. And then Spafford, working through his grief, decided he was going to put some words down. Sometimes it helps when we write things out. And Spafford began to write through his grief, and he wrote these words. They might sound familiar to you. When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. And though Satan should buffet and trials should come, let this blessed assurance control, that Christ has regarded my helpless estate and has shed his own blood for my soul. It is well with my soul. See, he discovered God does give songs in the night. And then I read that Philip Bliss, who composed the music that we love to sing that goes along with those words, not long after composing the music, he and his wife died in a train accident. But they left us a marvelous song of faith. A song we're going to sing all of the verses of in just a moment. But before we do, let me make it real clear to you this morning. Tragedy is going to knock one day at the door of your home. None of us like to think about that. We all pull back. But let me make it very clear to you this morning, no matter what the trouble will be, there is help and there is hope when you have a personal encounter with Jesus. When you know Jesus, he becomes that friend that sticks closer than a brother. And so this morning, I want to encourage you to do what Jairus did a long time ago. Have an encounter with Jesus. Fall at his feet. Tell him what you need. He can exercise his power and do miraculous things. Jesus is still in the business of healing sickness. Jesus is still in the business of mending broken relationships. Jesus still gives grace for the trials that we face in this life. Jesus can come and he can mend a broken heart. Nothing is too big for him to do. When we encounter Jesus by faith, we can watch him powerfully work to accomplish his purpose in our lives so that we can say, "It is well with my soul."